Alright, hi everybody, welcome to our next lesson here in the Cold War about the Vietnam War. So our objectives and standards are to explain how the Vietnam War began and to analyze the involvement of the United States in the conflict. And take a moment there to read the standards, please. So our desired result here is what important events occurred in the Vietnam War. So France controlled most of Southeast Asia in the early 1900s for its natural resources. But nationalism in the region soon developed, including in the French country of French Indochina, where Ho Chi Minh, a young Vietnamese, turned to the communists for help in gaining independence from the French. And in the 1930s, the Indochinese Party held revolts and attacked the French. Now, the French responded by putting protesters in jail, and they sentenced Ho Chi Minh to death, but he fled. That's his picture up there. He returned in 1941 when Japan invaded, and he helped found the Viet Minh, or Independence League. When the Japanese left in 1945 at the end of World War II, Ho Chi Minh believed that his country had gained independence from the French, but France was not willing to accept the claim. So the return of France. The Vietnamese nationalists and communists fought the French army, and France struggled in the fight and against the tactics of their enemy. Finally, in 1954, France surrendered, but prior to that, the U.S. had supported France in the conflict with economic support and things like that. When France lost control of the country, the U.S. saw Vietnam as a rising threat because of communist influence in the area, and because of the theory of the domino theory, which was used by President Eisenhower to describe policies enacted by the United States during the Cold War. The United States will become involved in Vietnam. This picture here shows you the Viet Cong kind of pushing against the Vietnam domino, like the domino theory here, and trying to knock down the other countries. Many people had the theory that if a country fell to communism, that other countries in the area would fall as well. So that's why you see the United States soldier on the other side there trying to hold up the dominoes and trying to protect the region from communism. There was a peace conference in Geneva, Switzerland, that after France left Vietnam, and the talks resulted in the division of Vietnam into North and South at the 17th parallel. Communists controlled North Vietnam, while there would be an anti-communist government in South Vietnam. And this government in South Vietnam was under the control of Nguyen Dien Diem. The problem was that Diem ruled South Vietnam like a dictator, and the Viet Cong began to form opposition to the leader and the government. In South Vietnam, we had communist supporters, who are known as the Viet Cong, who began to form in opposition to Diem and his control like a dictator. For example, there were limits on freedom of speech and religion. There was also other types of persecution. And in 1963, South Vietnamese generals had Diem assassinated. After this, the Viet Cong will begin to take control of South Vietnam with communism. So here's a map here to kind of show you where we're talking about. So this would be the 17th parallel. That's the vision point there. North Vietnam up here was communist, and then South Vietnam down here was anti-communist or democratic. So the United States, with the possible victory for communists in Vietnam, the United States decided to increase involvement in the country. In August of 1964, President Johnson told Congress that 2 U.S. ships had been attacked by North Vietnamese patrol boats, and Congress approved sending troops to fight in Vietnam in the Tonkin Gulf Resolution. By 1968, U.S. troops in combat reached more than 500,000 in Vietnam. Now, this was a very difficult war. Despite the United States being a more advanced military, and probably the most advanced military, they faced many challenges. U.S. soldiers fought in jungles that they were unfamiliar with, against hit-and-run tactics and booby traps. And the Viet Cong also grew stronger with support from communists, China, and North Vietnam in South Vietnam. The United States did try to use bombing runs to try to fight back, but all this did was increase support for the Viet Cong in South Vietnam. So as involvement increased with no real success, people in the U.S. began to protest the war. And finally, President Richard Nixon and the government decided to gradually pull troops out of the area in 1969. He put in place a plan called Vietnamization, which was supposed to allow for South Vietnamese troops taking over and taking back their country. And he also increased bombings in neighboring countries such as Laos and Cambodia. The U.S. troops left Vietnam in 1973, but 2 years later, North Vietnam overran South Vietnam and took complete control of Vietnam, and Vietnam is a communist country to this day. So the legacy of the Vietnam War. The Vietnamese lost 1.5 million, and the United States lost 58,000. We also saw Cambodia have violence in it as well. As a result of this, a brutal communist government under a man by the name of Pol Pot were responsible for the slaughter of 2 million people. Vietnam did invade and installed a less oppressive government in Cambodia, but struggles continued there until 1993. Many in South Vietnam were also sent to re-education camps to learn communism and things like that, and they faced harsh laws. Refugees did flee South Vietnam, but many of them unfortunately died along the journey. But around 70,000 settled in the United States. And like I said earlier, Vietnam is a communist country today, but it does allow for some foreign investment as well. Okay, so our closure. What important events occurred in the Vietnam War? Think about some of the struggles that Vietnam faced and how France and the United States got involved and how the United States finally ended its involvement in Vietnam, and that will help you answer your question. All right, have a great rest of your day or night, and I will talk to you soon.